Hi, this is Colleen Dachowicz. I am the Texas PTA State Treasurer, and with me today is Christy Decker. She is our Director of Finance. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. I'll share my screen. Okay. All right, so we are here to talk about today our plan for being in the final stretch. What is our guide for finishing the year up strong? And we are going to touch primarily today on the requirements and deliverables for our last meeting of the year. It's called the annual meeting. And as well as talk a little bit about the Budget and Finance Committee and then some organizational housekeeping. At the end of the presentation, I'll share with you dates that have been shared in our Treasurer's newsletter around 2 additional upcoming webinar trainings we'll be doing through our learning labs, which include passing the financial torch, so transitioning from current treasurer into the incoming treasurer. And then that's for April. And then in May, we'll be doing financial reconciliation, preparing our books, and how to move forward from there. Okay. Great. As always, we start with our PTA vision, mission, and purpose. It's important for us to always have our heads thinking about what is our overall vision and mission as we talk about all things PTA, but in particular, the financials when it comes to budgeting, how we're spending our money, and how we're wrapping up our year. This presentation and our time together is informal, so please feel free to unmute and ask a question. Throw it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that. Christy's helping out with chat and can share your question from there. So whatever you're most comfortable with, but please feel free to stop as we go and while we're on the topic so we can get any questions addressed. And also, if you have anything that you would like to add as we go through the presentation that you feel others would benefit from, I welcome that as well. Okay, so the annual meeting, you'll hear that a lot of times. We talk about the annual meeting. That basically is our last membership meeting of the fiscal year. So when you read bylaws and you read other documents and we refer to the annual meeting, we're talking about the very last membership meeting of the fiscal year. What do we have to do as treasurers for that annual meeting? We do what we standardly do for all of our meetings for both board and membership. We provide a financial report. And then if we have budget amendments for the current fiscal year, then we are sharing those as well and having our membership vote on those amendments. We're going to talk very briefly through the standard deliverables just to make sure that we're all on the same page. It helps gives a little bit of context for what our additional deliverables are. And please feel free again to ask questions. Even though those are standard deliverables, everybody does things a little bit differently. And so feel free to ask questions there as well. And then also, what are our additional duties for the annual meeting? And we're going to talk about the annual report, both the preliminary and then touch a little bit on the final report for the next fiscal year. The proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year 26-27, and then also making sure that our financial reconciliation committee is appointed by our president. Okay, so jumping in, I'll talk briefly about this information, financial report. So we are always doing a financial report for every one of our meetings for both the board and membership. Typically, the time periods are different for those meetings, so we are doing different reports. We're not using the same report for the board meeting as we are for the membership meeting. We are covering the time period since that body last met. So it's the period since we last reported, and we're including that information, and that is generally what we talk to in the meeting. When we talk about what we have to read into the minutes, it's for the current period. We also have in the report the year-to-date versus the approved budget. That's optional. You can either have it in the financial report or you can have it in a separate budget report. The example that I've got here shows it all in one. And also, just as a reminder, because I think that this is something that has grown as the number of accounts we use has grown. And sometimes we miss as PTAs that our financial reports should be including all of our accounts. So not just our primary bank account, but if we have multiple bank accounts, or we've got things like a Cheddar Up account, or accounts that exist on other platforms, we need to make sure that we're capturing it all in our financial reports. And we're following that with the meeting minutes. So again, I've listed here for you the information that's read into the minutes. When I'm presenting my financial reports at the local or council level, I tend to give more detail. I hit on the things where maybe we've had a lot of activity. We had a big fundraiser that we just finished, or we've got some big expenses that just hit. So I generally will share beyond that. But at minimum, I just wanted to make sure that you all we're locked in and aware that these are the things that we need to, at minimum, be reading out loud, sharing with our board and membership at our meetings, the list of this information. Does anyone have questions on the financial reports?
Just a real quick one. Is liabilities the same thing? Oh my goodness, sorry. I'll put it in the chat. I've got a weird echo.
Liabilities is the same as escrow. Is that where you were? Or yes, okay. I've got you, Amy. So, okay. So yes, liabilities, we want to read in that we're reading the change in the liabilities. So if we have a sales tax permit, that means we're collecting sales and use tax. And so we want to make sure that we are reporting, excuse me, to the body that we have, taken in more money. What does that change? We've got an additional $150 in our liability for sales and use tax, or we've just closed a quarter or our annual filing. We've paid the state and we are at a negative for our liabilities, because again, it's for the current period. So it sounds weird that you would be at a negative liability, but it just is because it's only looking at the current period. Also in liabilities is your state and national dues that for your membership. So all of your, again, as a reminder, what goes in your budget or in your financial report is only the local portion of your dues, and then state and national dues would sit in the liability lines, because those are the dues that when people join, they're also joining state and national, and they're paying those dues as well through liabilities. Okay. Annual reports. The preliminary annual report is presented to the membership at that very last meeting of the year. We haven't closed our fiscal year yet, so that's why it's called a preliminary report. And it's covering from the very first day of the fiscal year. So for many PTAs, that's usually a July 1 date, but it's in your bylaws. It's the very first day of your fiscal year through the meeting dates, and it's going to give you that year to date, and you're comparing it to the budget that was last approved by the membership voting body. So basically what we want to be sharing with our membership is, did the budget get utilized as we expected it to? Did the income come in where we expected it to, what we had planned for? Where is our PTA going to end up for the year, based on also what we've had to spend that year to meet our goals and our plans? And so we want to make sure that we're showing the membership, again, our year to date versus the last budget that was approved. Now, keep in mind that in this meeting, at some point, you're likely going to be presenting budget amendments for the 25-26 year, but those amendments aren't approved yet. So as we're presenting that annual report, just keep in mind, it is not what you're proposing as a budget. It is what has been approved by your membership to date. So that's what's going to be on this report. And we're letting the membership know, do we come over, under? Are there adjustments that need to be made? It also helps to set a little bit of the groundwork for this meeting. So we're covering in this meeting the financial report, the annual report, budget amendments for the current year, and then the proposed budget for the next year. So when we're able to show them the annual report, we're going to come back and talk about it again when we get into budget amendments for next year. So when I present the annual report, even though it's preliminary, I like to hone in on things that are going to help me tell my story later about my budget amendments later. So if our big fundraiser came in under where we expected it to be by $1,000, I might be saying later when I present my budget amendments, I might have a recommendation around adding a fundraiser or reducing the managing our expectations to say, I don't think the fundraiser is going to do as well. Because remember when I showed you the annual report and we came in 1,000 under, I think we need to take that into account. So call out those things when you're presenting your annual report, or what I like to do is call those things out. So again, it helps create context and set the stage for what you're going to be presenting to your membership later for a vote. This is because it's a preliminary report. It is not voted on. So there's nothing to vote on. You're just updating the membership, and it gets filed for reconciliation just like your regular financial report would or does. The final annual report is actually the responsibility of the current treasurer. So you would still be responsible for completing the final report, but you would not do that until your fiscal year closed and you knew all of your transactions were in, you had everything updated in your ledger, it was nice and pretty, and you're saying, okay, now I'm going to run my annual report, and that would be considered the final annual report, the official one. And that would include, and I've called that out here because that would include a newly amended budget. So again, keep in mind when you're presenting the preliminary, you have a budget that was approved, let's say January 5th. At the end of this meeting, you may be presenting budget amendments for the current fiscal year. If they get approved in this meeting, you're going to then need to change your annual report to reflect that newly approved budget that got approved in this last May meeting. So just make sure that sometimes that's something that we miss because there's so much going on and there's so much that we have to do in our reporting. So just make sure that you're capturing any amendments to your budget in that final report. That report is what is ultimately provided to the Financial Reconciliation Committee, and it will be presented at the first membership meeting of the new fiscal year, and that's when it will be adopted, is when it's finished. Does anyone have any questions around the annual report? Okay, so the annual report is basically meant to just ensure transparency to our membership so that they feel connected to what we're doing, and it's giving us a deep dive look into how we ended the year. Okay, and in terms of what we're reading into the minutes, whether it's the preliminary or the final, it's the same reporting requirements that we just talked about for the financial report. So that beginning balance, total income, expenses, that list that we saw on the prior page, same reporting requirements here when you present these reports. Okay, so budget amendments. We like to recommend that you're doing budget amendments as often as you've got new data to share with your membership. So I tend to present budget amendments at most of my membership meetings. Whether you've presented them before or not, you definitely want to make sure that by this last meeting of the year, you're amending your budget as much as possible to get it as closely aligned to your actuals as possible. The reason why is because if you look down here, this cash balance forward, that's the number that we're going to be starting with for our 26-27 budget. So we just want to make sure that we're getting as close to possible to the real number. Okay, so we want to look at what funds did we raise versus our goals and versus what was in the budget. If we had now I've got fundraising event in there, that's a placeholder. We would never use that in the report. It should be like fun run or something like that. But you can see like fundraiser carnival in the report example that's shown. Actually, I'm going to go to a different one. Let's do Spirit Store. Spirit Store, we had approved a budget of $2,500, but that actually did better than we had expected. And so we increased that budget line by $279 because what we actually brought in for that Spirit Store was $2,779. And we know that we're done. The store is closed. We're not selling anything else. Now, if we thought that we might be selling a little bit more through the end of the year, you can take that number higher than actuals. It does not, been asked this question before, I think in our budget webinar, does our budget have to match actuals? It does not have to match actuals. Actuals is a guide for us. So again, if an event is closed, if you know that all of the receipts and the expenses are all in, then we can match it to actuals. If you think that we may sell a few more shirts, or you know that one of your chairs hasn't turned in all of their receipts, you can pad a little bit on your receipts or your expenses to make sure that you're covered in the budget to do those things. Okay, so just make sure you're using those actuals though as a guide to get as close as you can as possible. So we're amending on actuals, but we're also amending again based on board input. So not just, hey, I still have receipts, but I'm squeaking in one last teacher event. So maybe our last meeting of the year is May 5th, and the last day of school is May 10th, and we're doing a final hospitality event for staff. So we need to make sure that, that is accounted for. And that's my hospitality chair saying, hey, I still have these things that I am going to be doing. The way that we do that is we do that through conversations with our board members. So you want to make sure you're always talking to the board members, of course, but it's also super helpful if you present your budget amendments to your board at the board meeting that precedes that membership meeting. So it's not required, but it's definitely a best practice. It helps to avoid any surprises. So you're not sitting in a membership meeting and having your hospitality chair raise their hand and say, oh, I forgot to tell you that I'm hosting an event on May 10th, and that's not in the budget. And now you're in front of membership, you have what you thought was a final budget to be voted on, and surprise, there's now an adjustment that needs to be made. That can be done, but it's just easier for us as treasurers if we have as many of those I's dotted and T's crossed as possible before we go into those meetings. So try to avoid the surprises. It also makes the board look more cohesive. We're talking to each other. We're going in with a final document. It gives feedback from gets that feedback from our chairs as well as their thoughts like, hey, that's an awful lot of money in our carryover for next year. Do you think we could do one more quick event and not be carrying so much into next year? There's a lot of discussion around that. And ultimately, even if what you share with your board, everyone nods their head and says, hey, Colleen, that's great. That I feel like that's the budget we can be taking into membership. What you're showing as the treasurer is that you're respecting each person's value as a contributor to the conversation. Each person owns their area. They have information they can share with us to help us understand what they're doing, what their concerns are, and what their vision is for their role, even up until that very last meeting. So engaging your board as much as possible in your budget amendment process is just really super helpful for everybody. Keep in mind that annual meeting is your last scheduled opportunity to ensure funding for the remainder of the year. So again, let's go back to that hospitality event. And let's say you did not bring your budget to the board for those discussions. The hospitality chair had planned something, forgot to mention it, and they weren't at the membership meeting. And now your budget is approved by your membership. Your budget is approved by your membership at this meeting. And that is the last time that you're going to have that membership together to vote on any amendments. And now your hospitality chair comes back and says, oops, I forgot to tell you, I need another $200 for that last event that I don't have in my budget. Now you're stuck. Now you have to either call a special membership meeting or you can't do the event. So that's why it's just super important to get it out in front of the board as well. As many touch points as you can have before you get to that membership meeting is benefit for everybody. Does anyone have any questions around budget amendments for the current year? Okay.
I had one quick question.
Yes.
On this example, you have the kind of $6,000 fundraising event for the carnival where you kind of made the generic line item more specific.
Yes.
Is part of this, like, especially when we're thinking about like the annual report, is part of this also about being able to better have the budget reflect, if we look at it next year, what actually happened. So the example I have right now is like we have a line item on our budget that is related to coffee for the teachers' lounge and other food that we put into the teachers' lounge. And I've been thinking about splitting that out into like, here's what we spent on coffee and here's what we spent on other, one-time events. I wasn't sure if that's then we're kind of reducing the actual expenses that we had later in the year versus something that already happened. That makes sense?
Yes, I mean that's a great question, Ben. Thank you for asking it. Yes, that's exactly what that 6,000 was doing, and it's one of the things that we dove into. This report is an example also from the budget training I think that you were in as well, and so it was leading into that example as part of that budget discussion. But you're absolutely right. So that $6,000 is basically so say for example when we're doing the 26-27 budget, we don't know what our fundraising event is going to be. So we're saying we're going to do something. We think it's either going to be a fun run or maybe it's going to be a check writing campaign, but we think we can get around 6,000. So we're going to call it fundraising event and then make it 6,000. And at some point we decide, no, you know what it's going to be? It's going to be a carnival. So what I'm going to do for transparency to my membership is I'm going to now call this, I'm moving that money into something called fundraiser carnival. So you can absolutely do that. And that is exactly right, that it is about transparency. And so if there are opportunities for you as you get more clarity around how that money's being spent, that you feel like would be more informative to the membership and more transparent and split it out, then that's exactly how you would do that. And you could split that out. And again, whether you do that for this year, in reporting it, you absolutely can. And then certainly as we get into the conversations for next year's budget, to your point as well, that's a great opportunity to be saying, maybe we need to rename these account lines for more clarity for the future. So yes, that's exactly what that reflects. Great question. And then so for budget amendments, the one last point on this is that it requires a 2/3 vote for approval. So what you'll see later is when we're talking about, there's different approval levels for different budgets. And we'll be talking about the 26-27 budget in just a second. But for the amendments for the current year, to get that approval, it's a 2/3 vote in the affirmative by the membership. Okay. One of the questions that comes up often is around carryover. Does Texas PTA have a suggested amount for carryover? We don't, because it really depends on the PTA. It's very variable. Some PTAs have it in their standing rules what a minimum would be. So it's anywhere from 3,000 to 7,000. It just really depends on your PTA. You want to think about, as a board and as the treasurer with your finance group, what is the timing for your funding and how long will it take you to get the money that you need to run the year? So for example, if your fiscal year ends June 30th and your big fundraiser is in September or October, you need to make sure that you've got enough money in the carryover that gets you from that July 1 date through that first fundraiser, including the cost of the fundraiser. So if you need to pay a vendor money or you need to buy t-shirts for that event or anything, you need to make sure all those costs are covered via your carryover amount. And then you can count on that fundraiser coming in that September, October time period. Some PTAs don't do their big fundraisers until the spring. And so you need to make sure you've got enough money in your carryover to get you to those fundraisers. So really, again, it's just cycling your fiscal year and understanding when is my next amount of money coming in and how much money do I need in the bank to cover everything I need to spend until that big fundraiser comes, with a little bit of padding. What you do want to be careful of, though, as you're amending this 25-26 budget and any budget, some watch outs for carryover. Is the carryover excessive versus the funds that you need? So if you need $12,000 to get to that next big fundraiser and you historically just keep carrying 20 from year to year, you want to start thinking about how do you utilize that money so that you're not carrying such an excessive amount from one fiscal year into the next. Again, we're nonprofits. The money that we raise in a given fiscal year is for the students, the families, the community that contributed in that fiscal year. So we want to try as best we can. Sometimes things happen, something we had planned falls through, it happens, but just keep an eye on it that we don't want to be too excessive in that carryover. We also want to keep an eye on whether it's increasing from year to year, because that is one of the ones that the IRS does actually tend to look at. So if you carry 10,000 over last year, 15,000 the next, 20,000 the next year, you start to look like you're a for-profit business. So you want to make sure that you're evaluating the amount of money coming in and where you're spending it, and how to make adjustments in your budgets. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into the 26-27 budgeting. But just watch that on your carryover as you're closing out your 25-26. We kind of are where we are right now. If you had a few last things that you wanted to buy and you've got excess in there, now's the time to do that. Just make sure that you're covered for your carryover. Okay. One question that we get a lot around amending budgets, especially from our treasurers that have accounting backgrounds, is why are we amending budgets? Typically we would set a budget and then we would pace and see how we performed against that budget all year, but we would not be making changes to the budget. The reason why we do that as a PTA is because we're a membership-driven organization. And so that is why it is so critical that even if you haven't had the opportunity or the knowledge or time to do amendments through the course of the year, again, we're all volunteers doing our best. It's really important at this point that you're able to take the time to do amendments for this last meeting of the year to make sure that your membership is reviewing where the year netted out, what money you have left, and making any amendment changes that are needed. The membership has ultimate authority over the financial direction of the organization, and they have the ultimate say in how our money is spent. The budget amendment process is really the mechanism that allows them the authority to exercise their opinion and what they think the organization should be doing. So just make sure that you're able to do that very last 25-26 budget amendments for this meeting. Does anyone have any questions around that? Okay, and then these are just some of the other reasons we do amendments. Our bylaws require it, transparency, board accountability, accuracy. It allows us to be adaptable, and it allows us to optimize our funds. We know how much money we actually have in the bank, and we can allocate it other places. So those are whys that hit a lot more during the course of the year, but I wanted to capture them here for you as well. Okay, so proposed budget for 26 and 27. For your budget for the next fiscal year, that budget needs to be proposed and approved in the current fiscal year at that last annual meeting. It is developed by the Budget and Finance Committee. That committee is made up by our treasurer. The treasurer serves as the chair. The president, as with all committees, except for two, serves as ex officio. So the president is ex officio on budget and finance. Sometimes your standing rules will have a list of who's supposed to be on that committee. So please make sure you check your standing rules to see who has to be included. You certainly can include more than what is in standing rules. Talk to your president about that if you'd like to. Typically included, though, in that committee is your fundraising chair, people who touch the money the most, that will be able to weigh in on expectations, on performance, on how fundraisers did, what to expect in the upcoming year. It's also great for this when you're planning the budget for the next fiscal year to invite your newly elected treasurer and president. If it's you, welcome back, and we're glad that you're staying. If you are outgoing, then it is important for you to include those incoming members so they can participate in the conversation. Sometimes they're just there to listen. They may be close to what the PTA's business has been over the last year, or they may not. And really, it's so helpful for those incoming roles and positions to be in the conversation, because you're going to be talking a lot about moving money around and what we can and can't do. And it grounds them so well in future conversations for the next fiscal year if they can be a part of your conversations now. So I encourage you to include them in the committee meetings and dialogue. One of the reasons we're making sure that or the main reason we're making sure that that budget is approved, developed by the committee and approved by the membership for 26-27 is that no activity can occur unless there is a membership approved budget in place. So if for some reason we don't get that budget approved in May and we don't have a membership meeting, we cannot be spending money, raising money over the summer at all, because our membership has not approved us to do so. So it's really important that we're making sure that we're getting that done at that last annual meeting of the year. We had talked about the vote that's required for these budgets to pass. The budget amendments that we talked about for 25-26, that is a 2/3 vote. This new budget that we're proposing for adoption only requires a majority vote. The general rule of thumb for financials and otherwise is that if you are introducing something new to the membership, it is for adoption, it's a majority vote, because we're not voting to change anything. We're just saying, here's a blank piece of paper, and here's what I'm saying we should be doing going forward. That's majority vote. When we are voting to change something like amendments or standing rules or bylaws, something that has already been put in place by a previous membership, that's a much higher hurdle. It's a 2/3 vote. So again, the prior vote, 2/3, this one is majority. It's the parliamentarian's role and the president's role to make sure that those votes are happening. But as treasurer, just make sure you've got that hat on as well, that you're paying attention and make sure you've got the right votes happening that are required for each type of budget that you're doing. Okay. Any questions around just that general makeup of the committee itself? Okay. When you meet as a budget and finance committee, and I suggest that you try and get on calendars as soon as possible, that meeting is probably coming quickly. Some of you have it in April even. So you want to get that budget and finance committee together as quickly as possible, because you want to give yourselves time to really talk through what the year looked like. So you're going to start first by looking at the current year's budget versus actuals, that annual report. You've got the preliminary done already, so you can work from that and say, were your PTA's needs met? Were you able to reach the goals that you had set in the beginning of the year? Or were there things that you had to cancel because you didn't have enough funds? What did you start what are you starting the year at? So 25-26, because you did budget amendments, you have a good idea of where that year, this current fiscal year, is ending. 15,000, 2,000, some number in between. You kind of know where you're starting the year because you made all those amendments. You had all those conversations with your board already to know what your real numbers look like. So now you know what your 26-27 is probably looking like with your budgeted beginning balance. Then you're going to look at that preliminary report for 25-26 and say, did our income and receipts, did we exceed budget? As we're planning this new 26-27 budget, can we spend more money on programs? Can we increase those expense lines? Should we be doing fewer fundraisers? Maybe we don't need to keep asking our families for money if we feel like we're able to actually cover everything we want to do in a given year, and we've got all this excess left over. So, or did our receipts fall short of what we had hoped for? What do we need to, and is that likely to happen again? So was it a fluke that our income didn't come in? We had a big sponsor and they just didn't come back this year. Well, that's probably we may not be able to make that money up. Or did it rain on our, or on a major fundraiser on the carnival, we still had it, but we just didn't do as well as we had hoped. But we think we'll do really well again next year if we do a carnival, right? So what are the things that we need to maybe adjust? And these are all the conversations that Budget and Finance Committee is having. And do we need to add an additional fundraiser? Maybe we're kind of capped out on what we've done. Maybe we need to change a fundraiser, or maybe we need to add an additional one. And will our families be able to support that? Are we asking too much? Like, what are those are the important conversations. If the board or the membership or those folks who get to spend the money have overspent, why? Is it controllable? Did we just have chairs that got a little carried away, maybe weren't watching the numbers, or did something happen that we had something blow up, we had to rebuy something, and it was what it was? And how controllable is that for the future years? If our expenses were below budget, again, the question always is why, right? Like, were we able to save? Did we have someone who just did big donations, but it's not repeatable? Our families were we had this business that offered pizza at every one of our teacher appreciation events. And so we really didn't have to spend a lot around hospitality, but that business closed. And so that's not a repeat for us. What is repeatable in the places where you've saved money? And again, you just want to make sure that your committee has enough time to be having all of these conversations around the current budget versus actuals, and really dissecting and having the right people on the committee and in the room who can answer the questions behind the why, so you can plan more effectively. Are there any new requests or plans? Now, again, we haven't done our plan of work yet, right? That doesn't come until later. So right now, this budget that we're building for 26, 27 is what we know today. And it's going to change, just like Ben had asked about. Now we have a better idea of how we're spending this money and allocating it. So we can incorporate that now into our new budgets. What are there new programs that our newly elected VP of programs is already talking about that we need to account for? What are those things that we need to be aware of? Are there changes in our campus? And this is where it's important for, if your president has been having conversations with the principal, or to get this information weighing into the conversation. Are there any rezones going on? Is your enrollment about to decline or grow just by natural attrition, or by campuses being reassigned, campuses closing? What do you need to account for on your campus? Do you have a shifting demographics? I know at our elementary school, for the longest time, we had super engaged volunteers. People were very engaged at the elementary level. But as our community aged out, those were still parents of elementary school kids, but they were also parents of middle and high school kids. And now their timing was being divided. Their money is being divided. They're now going back to work part-time, so they're not as available. So now you're having to hire somebody to help with a fundraiser that used to be all volunteer driven. So what are the dynamics that you may have been seen slowly or quickly evolving on your campus that are going to impact the way questions around these types of topics upon, as you've done your budgeting, that was oh my gosh, I'm glad we figured it out, or oops, I wish we hadn't missed that you'd like to share? Okay, we're going to keep going then. Other things then, of course, to consider are the things that are common in all of our budgets, to make sure we don't miss, having the appropriate levels of insurance. If, insurance, part of our insurance is determined by the types of events we're having. So if your events, you're no longer going to have bounce houses. Do you need less liability insurance? Do you have, are you carrying more or less money in the bank in a given fiscal year? That's going to necessarily affect how much insurance you think you have to carry. Leadership training. Do you have a really new board? Are you going to have to send more people to launch? Do you have a seasoned board? Is launch being held locally that year and it wasn't in prior years? And then, of course, programs, parent education and advocacy. That's all about why we're here. It's really focusing on the mission. One of the things and the reason that we talk about the vision, mission, and purpose when we start these trainings is this is where it feeds in, right? When we're talking about budgeting, another number we get asked a lot is what's the right number for hospitality? We don't have that number. Hospitality is an important number, keeps our teachers happy and engaged, and that makes for a happy environment for our kids. It's important. We don't have a percentage that we can give you, but it's important that all of your money isn't necessarily going to hospitality, and then you can't fund programs. So keeping in mind always at the forefront, most importantly, is really meeting our mission. And all of these things, insurance is a need, training our leaders, programs, education, and advocacy, all critical parts of our mission. And then the account lines, Ben, this goes to your question earlier, is around, do we need to update account lines? Are they really transparent? Like the way that we've been talking about these account lines, what we don't really want to have is account lines by role, like this is the president's account line. Is it administrative? That needs to be administrative, not president. So are we being transparent? Are there updates? Like we now see how we've historically always called this budget line X, but now that fun run has really now evolved, right? It's more a check rating campaign. So we need to update that. We're going to be doing a check rating campaign. One thing I also wanted to throw out to you all to think about as you're going through your budget and figuring out your account lines. If you are a 990N filer, typically, this doesn't really go towards you as much. It doesn't weigh in as much to maybe your thought process. But if your PTA tends to file a 990EZ, think about the designations and the designations in that 990EZ and lining those up with your account lines, right? So it's always easier to do the 990EZ if you can take an entire line and dump it into line one of the EZ. So if, for example, copies, we don't do a lot of photocopying anymore, but let's just say we make flyers. Do we want those flyers for the carnival to live in carnival? I mean, they're a carnival expense, but there is a 990EZ line that is for all copies and mailings and things like that. I'm not saying there's not one right answer. It's what's best for your PTA and how you look at your financials. I'm just putting it out to you as something to think about. If you're an EZ filer, to think about that when you're setting up your account lines, if that can make it easier for you or a future treasurer in completing that tax filing. And then also, of course, thinking about the carryover requirements. Again, looking at your standing rules, are you officially required to carry a minimum amount? And then also looking at your year. Is your first fundraiser moving this year? Do you need more carryover because instead of doing your big fun run in September, you're not doing it until October? So you're going to need more in your carryover. So you want to be thinking about the carryover as well and what your PTA needs based on that conversation we had earlier. Does anyone have any questions around this part of the considerations for budget and finance or anything to add? Okay. So then what happens for the budget and finance committee? Again, recommended as best practice is we're going to take this to the board. It's going to come from committee. It's going to come to the board. Allow time for discussion because that's where you're going to get a lot of that great information that you may not realize that the person who used to be your advocacy chair is now becoming your programs chair. And they had this big idea they hadn't had a chance to share with you yet about a program they want to do for next year. So again, same reasons, avoid those surprises, get that buy-in and feedback, walk into that membership meeting, respecting each person on the board's value. the voice that they can lend to that budget being informed, and then going into membership with your very best assessment of what 26-27 looks like as of now. And of course, that's going to all change once you do your POWs, but that's okay because it gets you through this year, and it is a lot of great conversation that you're going to be having in planning process. The next step would then be to take it to that last meeting of the year, the annual meeting. It gets presented to membership for adoption, and that's the majority vote to pass that we already talked about. Any questions on this last piece around the board and membership meetings?
Quick question on that last piece. When we are voting to adopt the next year's budget, do we have to say to take place as of July 1, or do we just say the 2026-27 budget?
You can just say, you can add clarity if you feel like it would help your membership because they aren't as close to the numbers in the budget. So it's a great idea to say this takes effect July 1 with our new fiscal year. Fiscal year is defined in the bylaws. So by definition, when we're saying 26-27, that's what it's for. But I think it's a great point to say your membership is probably not as in the weeds as y'all are as a board. And it's super helpful for them to realize that we're not flipping this switch until July 1. So don't make June plans. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Amy. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments? Okay, some just general housekeeping things. Get that budget and finance committee meeting scheduled as soon as possible. Again, double check the standing rules. Not every PTA has it in their standing rules, but do a double check to see who might be required to be there. I encourage you to invite that incoming treasurer and president to be a part of the conversations. Also, for the last board meeting, I just want to put some of these things out on your radar because these are the things that as treasurers, I'm speaking from experience when I wake up the day after our last board meeting and say, oh my gosh, we didn't read the non-signer review forms into the minutes. And now we only have through January in the minutes. I mean, I know we're all doing our best at every single board meeting to do the prior months, but we're volunteers. And so if that has not happened, we just want to make sure, even if you have 4 months of non-signer reviews, like ding, 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 that's the last time you can get that. Remember, the Financial Reconciliation Committee is going to be looking to see that those are done. So you obviously can't have it done through the end of the fiscal year, but you can have it done for any month that has closed. So if you have an April meeting, you should be able to do it through March. Get that in there, get it right into the minutes, make it official, check that box ahead of time for what the FRC is going to be looking for. If you are missing signatures on any of your forms, your last board meeting is a great time. I would go in there with little Post-it tabs on any page with my binder that was missing a signature and walk in there, and I'd have it by person, and I would sit and I'd talk to them. This is what this was. A lot of times, I don't know if y'all had this happen, a lot of times the chairs fill it out automatically and hand it to you, and they don't sign their own forms. So I can't tell you how many chairs I had to go back to where they were requesting their own reimbursement and hadn't signed their own chair line. So just make sure that if you missed any through the course of the year, that you're catching up. Those are all getting done. It doesn't have to be at the board meeting, but that's a great time to catch everyone. You don't have to chase them down later. Also, recommendation for that last board meeting, I love to invite my incoming treasurer to that meeting as a special guest with my president's approval. It is a wonderful opportunity for a treasurer. Now, if they sit on your current board, they're going to be there anyway. But if they are new, or they have, whether they've been on a board but not at your school, or they haven't been on a board in a while, or they are just lovely, have volunteered to be treasurer, but have not sat on a board before. And it is a wonderful opportunity to invite them to that last board meeting. Let them see how you present that financial report. Let them see the conversation that happens. One of the hardest things I think coming in as a new treasurer, if you haven't seen your reports presented before, is, well, how much detail do they really give? How much do they talk about it? I feel like people are really maybe not paying as much attention. Like, is this too much, too little? So help them get comfortable with the process by inviting them to that meeting with your president's approval as a special guest. For your last membership meeting of the year, I know we filed on time. We hit that January 20th date, whether we were quarterly or annual. If for any reason we had an oops and we missed that, this is a great opportunity. Go back, make sure you got that January 20th filing submitted for your sales and use tax return for those that have a sales permit, and make sure that that is in your, it's all taken care of. So then when you're reporting at that last membership meeting, you've shown, whoever's not muted, if you could mute, please. Thank you. If you could just make sure that your sales and use tax returns, everything is there and in your report, that would be great. And then also make sure your membership submissions have all been sent into Texas PTA and you're all up to date. If you're continuing to get memberships after this, wonderful. That is fantastic. Keep going, keep submitting them, as you go. But let's use that last membership meeting as kind of that mental reminder that says, I'm going to check in with my VP or chair of membership and make sure that all of those submissions are in, that my liability line is a 0 in terms of what I still owe Texas PTA because I've got everybody submitted. And then another recommendation that I like to start doing around now, and we're going to cover this in more depth in our May webinar when we talk about the Financial Reconciliation Committee and the process as treasurers and what we need to do for that. Look at that checklist. It is out there on the Texas PTA website. If you go to the treasurer's page, it's at the bottom with the resources. It gives you the list of all the things that the FRC is going to be looking at. And that's where you're going to get those light bulb moments of, oh my gosh, the non-signer review forms, signatures, like start getting those books in order now as much as possible, a little bit at a time, so it's not as overwhelming. So just start looking at that as you go to make sure that, you're preparing. And again, we'll deep dive in that in May. You're going to have May and June to get all that in order, but now is a great time to start looking at it if you can leverage those meeting times to get some work done as well. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I just did this for y'all as just a quick snapshot. Board meeting versus membership meeting, each of the things at a glance that you want to be making sure you do. And this just captures in summary the highlights of everything that we've already talked through in one page in your board versus membership meetings. One big call out, make sure that FRC is appointed by the president at that last membership meeting of the year. It is critical that FRC is done. They have to be appointed and approved by the membership. So if it's missed, then you're going to have to call a special meeting to get that done. And the timing starts to get tight once the fiscal year closes on getting that financial reconciliation done. So if nothing else, make sure you are working with your president as treasurer to ensure that FRC is appointed. It does not hurt to do some early groundwork and start to figure out who would be willing to serve on the FRC. Prior to walking into that last membership meeting. A lot of times our presidents are already working on that. As treasurer, you have good insight into that as well. So get with your president and try and make sure that committee is appointed. That is everything that we have for the final stretch conversation and preparing for the annual meeting, some of the organizational pieces for housekeeping. Did anyone have any questions or anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about or touch on? I'm going to share this with you. These are the 2 upcoming trainings we've got in April. On April 9th, we've got Passing the Financial Torch. That is about transitioning to incoming treasurers. So if you are rolling off, this will be helpful for you in preparing everything that you need to do an effective, impactful transition to the incoming treasurer. I would say if you have the time to join us, even if you are a returning treasurer for 26, 27, we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks and things that may help you in saying, hey, I'm looking to do things a little bit differently next year. I adopted my process and the way I do things from last year's treasurer, and I'm going to see what maybe some of these transitional recommendations are that I can keep in place for my next fiscal year. So we welcome you to come and join us as well. And then we've got a roadmap to a stress-free FRC review. That webinar is on Wednesday, May 6th at noon. You can register for both of these trainings utilizing the Treasurer's newsletter that comes out each month. You can also email me at treasurer@texaspta.org, and I am happy to email out the links to you to sign up for either of those. And does anyone have any questions, anything that you wanted to have covered that popped into your head, or anything that sits outside of this, but because we're here and we've got a lot of people who obviously love Treasure because you're here spending this time with us, feel free to ask anything, really, if you have any questions.
Colleen, I had a question. This is Kendall Reese.
Yes. Hey, Ken. Hi, Kendall.
Hi. I'm both a local treasurer and a council treasurer, and will be the council president. So I got a lot of things going on inside my head.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm trying not to drink from the fire hose right now. Looking at our budget for next year at the council level, but I would assume it probably applies to the local level. I've actually never been to launch. I know, crazy as that sounds. But with launch being earlier this year, do you recommend that we try and budget? Where do you recommend that launch money comes from? Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's in such a weird place. Like, I don't know whether to look at it, trying to move it into the end of this fiscal year, or how's
I have,
most
oh, go ahead.
Mhm.
I have always split it so that all registrations are in the current fiscal year. So 25, 26 would be budgeted for and take the hit for registrations of all people that will be attending launch. And then the 26, 27 budget would include hotel stay or any, travel costs, anything else associated with the actual event, because a lot of that you're not going to actually have the receipts for. So it almost goes counter to the calendar. Like for 26, 27, I would budget the event expenses such as travel, hotel, food, those types of things for the 2026 launch, and then also 2027 registration. That's what I would include in my 26, 27 budget.
So then whoever
based on the payouts.
Okay. So then when we're writing at our council, we have a training VP and they cover whatever happens at launch for council. So the plan of work for that should cover both of that same time frame, correct? In the same way?
Yes. Yes, I would align the POW to match the budget exactly. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. Any other questions or thoughts, ideas to share? Any of those who've traveled the road already? Lessons learned?
Quick question on the professional development for the teacher support fund. I got a reimbursement request for the hotels. Like I was able to reimburse for the symposium, but I wasn't sure hotel was reimbursable for the staff for the symposium. So would that be reimbursable or not?
So the symposium, the launch event, is that what you're?
Not the launch event, for like the staff, like the leader in me, like leadership symposium for like the principal and like few of the grade level leaders.
Okay, so they go to like a leadership symposium and they
Yes.
are asking for
Requested.
PTA they're requesting that PTA fund that. Um,
Yes.
you can, so standard school of thought is that you can fund the actual educational piece. But it is not like the class, like the actual cost to attend. Uh, but you get into a slippery slope if, for example, you are covering things like the hotel costs in a way where you're directly reimbursing the attendee, because that is where the IRS can start to look at that as if it's income for the staff member. So you would almost be better off creating like some type of grant process or a way to fund that to the school and have the school cover the staff's costs, because again, and that may be how you're doing it, but as soon as you involve it, like let's say I'm a teacher, I pay for my hotel out of pocket, and then I'm asking the PTA to reimburse me for that. Even if you have the budget line in your PTA that budget that membership has approved, that becomes reportable income for the staff potentially. And
Got it.
so for that reason, you want to avoid doing it that way. But there are ways to do it, and you can do that within reason. And the treasurer's guide actually does go into a little bit of depth in terms of what we're allowed to fund and not fund by way of
Yes. Yes.
extending, continuing education for staff. But that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it, because it's not really addressed in the guide, and it absolutely can be problematic for staff. So thank you for asking that. That was a great question.
Thank you.
I have a kind of similar question that's maybe somewhat related, but to that. I was asked at our last membership meeting if it was possible in a future year for us to pay a stipend to a teacher to help produce the yearbook, because our longtime yearbook person is aging out of the school. And I know that that's a gray area. So if you'd prefer that I just email to get more specifics, I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, why don't we talk offline,
Okay.
because that, yeah, from a publication standpoint and subsidize, it depends on how
Sure.
we go at it.
Okay.
Yes, Ben, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Colleen, I have a quick question. I put it in the chat. I missed I'm a first year, first time treasurer. I'm one of those that swore I would never do this, but our PTA was on
Welcome.
the brink. Thank you. It was on the brink of fully collapsing. So president raised her hand. I said, I'll support you. So I've had some struggles with balancing. And I know for a fact that I missed that January 20th date. I've gone into IRS and kind of poked around, but I don't see where I can file now that I'm late.
So that filing, it's sales and use tax, and it's actually with the state of Texas. That is different than your file. We have two different filings. One is annual with the IRS. The other is with the state. But why don't Renee, you and I connect offline, and I can walk you through that process so that you can get your taxes filed for state. And it may be that you don't even aren't even required. It depends on. I can look up your PTA and we can
Okay,
look at it to see what was required for you.
great.
You may be okay. You may not have missed anything, but we'll check. And
Okay,
if you did, we'll get the books in order for you.
perfect. I'll send you an email right after this. Thank you.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.